Is it on? Yes. Hi there. How are you? Today, I'd like to tell you about the great state that we call Canada. Canada was founded in 1503 when some Mounties were given a vision that they should start a new country when they see a polar bear sitting on a daffodil holding a penny whistle. They searched and searched for many days. Then one day, one of the Mounties said, "Jean-Luc, voilà!" which means, "I have found it." Jean-Luc came running, and sure enough, there was a polar bear sitting on a daffodil holding a penny whistle. They both laughed like Inspector Clouseau. Ho ho ho! Because the daffodil and the polar bear and penny whistle were out in the middle of a great ocean. They decided that the only way to have a country was to build around it. So they started making ice. They made lots and lots and lots of ice. They piled it around the daffodil. A few days later, they had a great continent. This is what they call Canada. That's what the Canadian flag looks like. It has a bear sitting on a daffodil holding a penny whistle. In 1666, the French came to Canada. Before that, everyone in Canada was from Switzerland. That is why they were so adept to the cold. Except Jean-Luc. He was French, but he doesn't count. So, they decided to set up some stores called Canadian Tire. One would think that Canadian Tire would sell lots of tires, right? That's not what they sold. They sold a strange food from France called poutine. Poutine is basically gravy poured on top of French fries. Only Canadians eat poutine. It is banned by international law everywhere else in the universe. Even on Mars it is illegal to eat poutine. Even on Alpha Centauri it is illegal to eat poutine. Poutine wasn't invented by the French though. It was invented by the great Canadian timberman, Paul Bunyan. See, Paul Bunyan was really big. He was 500 axe handles tall. That's really big because an axe handle is like 6 feet tall. He had a great big blue ox called Babe. They would hang out in British Columbia and cross-dress. One day, they were hungry, so they got some giant potatoes that were like 10 axe handles long each. They made them into French fries. When Paul Bunyan turned around, Babe took a dump on those French fries. Without looking, Paul Bunyan grabbed one and took a bite. "Yum," he said. "This tastes good." And so, poutine was invented. So, when the president wanted to build new stores called Canadian Tire and asked Paul Bunyan to cut down all the trees to make them, he said he would do it on one condition. The president asked him what that condition was. Paul Bunyan said that that condition was that instead of selling tires, all Canadian tire shops must sell poutine. Even to this day, all the poutine sold in all the Canadian tire shops in all of Canada comes from Babe the Blue Ox. Anyway, one day in Canada, all the polar bears got together. They said they didn't like the Canadian government and they wanted to take over. The French people of Canada were not happy with this, no sir. So they told the polar bears that instead of having a war, they would hold a diplomatic meeting. So they all went to Belgium. Paul Bunyan and Babe also went to Belgium because Belgium is famous for waffles and Paul Bunyan sure likes waffles. Anyway, that night, Paul Bunyan had a little too much Belgian Trappist ale to drink and went on a killing rampage. He stormed through town. Then he saw the UN meeting, and boy was he mad at those polar bears. He stormed up to them and said, "Hey, stupid polar bears, you stop trying to take over or I will cut you into little pieces." Then he picked up their leader and proceeded to cut him into pieces with his axe. The polar bears got so scared that they all turned white. This is why polar bears are white. To this day, if you go to the capital of Canada, at the top of the CNN Tower in Vancouver, You will see in the center, encased in plexiglass, is that very polar bear that was defeated all those years ago. I'll bet you think they use snowmobiles, right? That's not true either. Canadians use dog-driven toboggans. A toboggan is a funny kind of sled they use up in Canada. It's long and curved at the front. Canadians like to get on them after drinking a lot of Pabst Blue Ribbon, which all Canadians drink. They go to the top of a big hill and slide down. A Canadian was the first person to break the light barrier. He did this on a toboggan, no less. It gets sticky sometimes because of all the maple syrup. Anyway, one time a Canadian person called Canada Canadian wanted to go to the Canadian Tire to buy some poutine on his toboggan. He got on his toboggan but wouldn't go. He didn't know what to do. His little doggie came out and he got an idea. He tied his doggie to his toboggan and had his doggie pull him. To this day, Canadians go everywhere with doggies tied to toboggans. I have even seen Scottish Terriers used. Anyway, there are a lot of good places to go in Canada. Canada has provinces, which is like the French version of states. Here's the story of how some of them got their name. A long time ago, the Canadians, as they call themselves, decided that every drug should be totally legal in Canada. You can go to a corner store in Canada and buy weed and heroin and all kinds of methamphetamines. Cocaine. Now, one part of Canada became really famous for having some of the best cocaine in the world. The Americans got most of their cocaine from Colombia, but the British came over to Canada on the Nina, the Pinot, and the Santa Maria to buy all their drugs from this place. Eventually, satirists started calling it British Columbia. That's how it got its name. Another part of Canada is called Alberta. It got its name because long ago Prince Albert went to live there. When he was living there, he decided to do what Paul Bunyan did and dress up like a woman. A man wearing women's clothing is funny. All the villagers thought this too. So as he roamed over the province, they all said, "There goes Alberta, the Princess of Denmark." This is because Prince Albert was the Prince of Denmark, and by adding an A to the end of his name, it made him more feminine. In time, Albert decided that he preferred being a woman. So he changed his name legally to Alberta, cut off his penis, and sewed himself some boobs stuffed with poutine. This is how Alberta, Canada got its name. The next province is called Northwest Territories. This is confusing because it's actually the name of the most southeast province in Canada. They did that to confuse people, though. Canadians have a weird sense of humor. You can see more of this in their hit comedy troupe, Kids in the Hall. Another province is called Saskatchewan. This province got its name because the Grand Vizier of Canada was looking for something to name it. He said to his scribe, "This province shall be called," and then started coughing up a hairball. You see, the Grand Vizier was a furry. This is a person that likes to dress up like an animal and run around pretending he is an animal. Sometimes furries take over hotels and have furry conventions where they all run around dressed up like animals. It's worth going only to see the hot chicks in leopard fur bikinis. Anyway, he had been grooming himself earlier that day and got a hairball. So when he coughed up his hairball, the scribe wrote down the sound he made and ran it off to the printer before the vizier could stop him. This is how Saskatchewan got its name. The vizier later became famous for pioneering what is called the beatbox. This is what early rappers do. One person makes coughing up hairball noises into his hands, and the other sings a rap song. There are some other things about Canada. The Canadians use kilometers. They use the metric system. At McDonald's, they can't call a quarter pounder because they are on the metric system, and they don't know what a quarter pound is. They would call it a 0.1133980.925 kilogrammer, but that would be stupid. Can you imagine going into McDonald's and saying, "I would like a 0.1133980.925 kilogrammer"? This would take forever, and it's not exact either, although it probably has way more significant digits than the scale used to measure out a quarter pound. Instead, they call it a royale. You would think they would call a quarter pounder with cheese a royale avec fromage, wouldn't you? They don't. They switch to English and call it a royale with cheese. Also, in Canada, they drive on the left side of the road. Quite often, they smoke marijuana and drink Pabst Blue Ribbon while they are driving. Maybe it's because they're so high and drunk that they don't drive on the right side of the road. If you try to drive on the right side of the road in Canada, the silly Canadians will argue until they are blue in the face that the right side of the road is the left side of the road. So hopefully, after hearing about Canada, you will all want to come to visit. Yes. Au revoir.